I just got an email. I'll call it a text message. I got to remember that these things aren't really the same. Well, yeah, they're the same. They're just come in different ways. Uh, during the course of a show, I'll get a text message from time to time. I'll get instant messages from Facebook. I get emails. So I've got different sources, people writing me in various ways. But a friend of mine dropped me a line and mentioned some of his relatives went to the Women's March in Washington over the weekend, and also was pointing out there may actually be now an investigation of Madonna for her comments that she, because it was a written speech, just wasn't off the top of her head, that she has thought about burning the White House down. Now, I don't know how she would pull that off. I guess a box of matches. I just can't see how that would get very far because the British tried it once and it just scorched the walls and was repainted, and now it's called the White House because of that. But when I tried to stay away from this women's march, but you couldn't over the weekend just simply because media was so breathlessly following it as if it was the be all end all. There's a great piece today in the Washington Examiner from a writer who says he's tracked the history of women's marches going back to the inaugural parade in 1913 when several women were actually arrested because they wore combat boots and fatigues, at least what you called fatigues at the time, and decided to join the parade riding horseback. And it didn't go well for them. And the writer then cites all of the women's marches that took place in the 1970s and in the 1980s and breaks it all down and says most of these were very forgettable. Also, the Roman Catholic priest, Father Dwight Longnecker, who writes a rather well-known blog for Pathos, says it's going to be forgotten, and he cites 10 reasons as to why. But I had to say that between that story and then the story about media being angry that Donald Trump's being mean to media, they manage. Trump may be. People say that he doesn't plan this stuff, but more and more people believe that what Trump does is he provides distractions for media, while then he goes off and does something else. So media did not cover a whole series of stories over the weekend with a great deal of attention. For instance, the defunding of Planned Parenthood overseas, the defunding that's coming for Planned Parenthood domestically, the defunding that's on the way for National Palestinian Radio, NPR. You know, one time I remember driving down a road and I had NPR on. There are a couple of shows on that network that I will listen to from time to time. They do a good pet show and a good cooking show. But most of the shows, obviously, are just blatantly liberal to Marxist Leninist. And I'm driving down the road and I'm listening, and there's one of the begathons going on, and the guy says, "Well, people think that we get," because in public radio I have to, take deep breaths and long pauses. "People think that we get all of our money from the government, but that's not true. We only get 60%. And I'm thinking, 60% for crying out loud. That's like being a little bit pregnant, right? And frankly, some of the shows, as I said, aren't too bad. They could likely go to an advertising type system, create their own private network, and I would assume do quite well. But they take tax money from everybody. I was tuning in to the reincarnation of a Prairie Home Companion the other night while I was on the car. I was on my way to church on Saturday afternoon. We have a vigil, and I went to that Friday or Saturday, as I say, evening. And I was listening to this new host who's terrible on Prairie Home Companion. And then there was a joke about the Women's March and huge applause from the audience. And you're thinking, my tax money paid for those political comments. And they don't have they occasionally have a conservative commentator that comes in. Diane Rehm, the crow there, she used to have Pat Buchanan in on her panel sometimes on Friday. But it is really rare. So you've got all the media bellyaching going on, and Trump was also talking about dismantling NAFTA, and of course TPP now is dead on arrival. And his office was also finalizing its pick for the Supreme Court. Amazing things happening in a very short period of time, and media's talking about Donald Trump and his press officers are being mean to us, and the Women's March was cool. And nobody will remember the Women's March a few months down the road. 12 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And I do thank you for joining us this morning. And so Trump has basically snookered the media once again. And media just seems completely bemused. Just I likened it in a blog post today. You can go to our website and you can check out my musings. I likened it to a dog chasing its own tail. Doesn't seem to have any real purpose to it, but obviously the dog is very what you'd call self-centered. Media, after what they did the last 8 years for Barack Obama, well, I could tell you what I think they did for Barack Obama over the last 8 years, but I'm not allowed to talk like that on the radio. Let's just say it's akin to a sexual act. And then they wonder why nobody in the Republican Party and even a great many other Americans has any respect whatsoever for what they do. Give me a break. Cal Thomas made an appearance on C-SPAN yesterday morning on Washington Journal, and he went on to say that a lot of these demonstrations, as well as threats against Donald Trump, are basically just for fundraising, so that the liberals can come together and pile up a lot of cash. Because even though Trump proved you don't need a lot of cash to win a big election on the national level, liberals are still going to be trying to do that. Take a listen.
What does that mean to you?
The left is trying to establish a narrative early, and this is even David Brock, a story I read this morning from the Washington Beacon, says that they're plotting already to impeach Trump. Now, this just isn't going to happen with a Republican Congress. It just isn't. But this is a fundraising tool. This is how they raise money for their causes, and they're perfectly fine to do it. Now, if I were advising the new president, I would say let's stop focusing so much on crowd size and these other things, and focus on the solutions to the problem.
Now, by the way, he said if he was counseling Trump, he wouldn't talk about crowd size issues. But then again, Trump managed to keep the focus off of what his office was doing over the course of the weekend on all of these other issues, funding and regulatory issues. And also then Thomas went on to say that news media is essentially at this stage of the game digging its own grave.
The major media is the only profession that I'm aware of in the country that doesn't really care what its consumers think. Now imagine if you owned a gas station that had bad lighting, high prices, and dirty restrooms, and a competing gas station opened across the street with lower gas prices, better lighting, and cleaner restrooms, and the guy with the bad lighting and dirty restrooms and high prices says, I don't care what you do, I'm going to continue doing what I do, you'd go out of business pretty fast. And the media reaction is that no, we're not biased. We're fair with it. So Dean Baquet of the New York Times, the executive editor, writes this memo, and kind of acknowledging that they have a problem, but not really, says we're going to be more diverse now. Well, to the New York Times, diversity means more liberals who look different. They're not all white males. They're women. They're Hispanics. They're African Americans, but they're still liberals, and they think like secular progressives. The great middle America, the red states, don't think like this. And I think that's a real problem for the media, and most conservatives don't pay attention to them anymore.
It's very, very true. And I've mentioned this before. I did not necessarily always enjoy it, but I spent 7 years in my last radio job working for, he was known in his early days on TV as David Schumacher, and then he became David Shoemaker, as I've said this earlier, when he discovered that his Alsatian ancestors actually spoke French. So he changed the pronunciation of his name midstream. But David was one of those last of the big old-time CBS News correspondents in the 1960s. And he happened to get into the radio business just as a sidelight. He and some friends invested in radio stations, and I'll never forget. We were sitting in a restaurant one day having some lunch, and we were talking a little bit about the direction media is going. Now, David had started out when he was a pilot in a Strategic Air Command. When he got out of Strategic Air Command, he got a job at a newspaper in Omaha. And then the paper owned a radio and television station, so they farmed him out to do some of the work over there because he had a really deep voice. And it wasn't long before he got picked up by CBS News. So he had worked the gamut, newspapers, radio, television, and he worked at network level, and he worked at the local level, finished his broadcast career as an anchor of a television newscast in Washington, D.C., a local newscast. But he told me at lunch that day, he said, media keeps complaining that they're losing readership and losing viewers because they have competition any longer from cable and the internet, and all of these things are competing for people's eyeballs. He said, and yes, to an extent, that's true. But then he added, he said, on the other hand, they are so dang liberal now, and they don't even realize it, they turn people off, and a lot of people just simply want nothing to do with them. There is a reason that on Friday, Fox News Channel's coverage of the inauguration, this is amazing, was triple what both MSDNC and CNN were combined. That's the average for the hour, which would have been Eastern Time, noon to 1 o'clock. But it's also the total viewership was triple. And Fox News Channel did the same trick on Election Day. Now, there's a reason this is happening, and it's not happening simply because there are necessarily more conservatives out there. All of the polls we're seeing lately have been telling us over the last dozen years that there aren't as many conservatives as there were from about 1981 through about 2005, that those numbers are greatly diminished. Well, people are watching it for another reason. They must buy into that line, fair and balanced, and you're not getting that somewhere else. And then all of these people who were comparing Mr. Trump's speech to Nazi rhetoric because he said he was going to put America first. I mean, he's not the president of Canada. He's not the president of Mexico. He's not the president of Germany, Italy, or Ireland. He's the president of the United States of America. It's his job to put America first. And all of these broads who are out belly aching in Washington over the weekend about, we're really America. Well, you know what? Over the last 8 years, nobody gave me the time of day because I didn't agree with the president of the United States or their party. And I was considered to be a non-entity. In fact, there was a fellow, an ACLU worker in California just a couple of weeks ago who told a city council meeting that he couldn't wait for old white Americans to die off, and because we're useless and we've got to be moved out of the equation. So I don't buy anything and again, calling it a women's march, somebody slipped at CNN over the weekend at the Clinton News Network and actually did point out it was really just a liberal march. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Randy Staples will join us from Idaho Weekly Briefing in about 20 minutes. This is also National School Choice Week, and there's a big event going on right now at the state capitol in Boise. There are 154 such events in Idaho alone this week. We'll be joined by the president of that organization, Andrew Campanella, coming up just after 9 o'clock news this morning, right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Great many of these women who were at this demonstration over the weekend, they were holding up signs. One of them was actually, I saw Cal Thomas, I mentioned him earlier, he posted on his Facebook page, and he said, I'm just not even going to comment on this. It was a woman dressed up as, well, a female private part. And they were holding up signs that said, don't try and grab me there. And, in other words, that's a reference to that old videotape of Trump talking to, one of the Bush grandchildren back in 2005. And then the snide comments about, make your own sandwich. But you look at all of these women, and my thought was, who's really interested in that? Let's be honest. They weren't, for the most part. Yeah, some of the celebrities, they look pretty good. That's why they're celebrities. They're not necessarily smart. They're just pretty, so they look good on magazine covers and the like. But Gloria Steinem, I mean, she's got to be 174 years old. Again, I don't get it. 8:23. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I wanted to tell you this morning about the Total Body Transformation System, which, as many of you know who listen every day, I've been participating in since late September, and I'm down 60 pounds. And if I was a little more disciplined over Christmas, I might be down 75. I'll admit that. But I've been bringing this up because it's a healthy way to lose weight. And in fact, the supplements that replace the meals that I'm missing are actually healthier than many of the meals you would normally be eating. And you're still allowed a healthy amount of calories every day, and you can still eat a lot of your favorite foods. The company that's been behind this has been in business over 20 years, and they have an A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau, and scientific researchers have looked this over. I told the story last week. A friend of mine from high school, she dropped 9 pounds in her first week on the diet. She's a registered nurse. She wouldn't do anything that would harm her physically because she knows medicine probably better than most of us do. The Total Body Transformation System has been awarded 2 patents. One is for reducing waist circumference and the other for increasing metabolic rate and weight loss. It'll burn 6 times more fat and you'll lose 8 times more weight than normal results from diet and exercise alone. Fellow left me a message over the weekend about this. I found it on the phone when I came in today. I got to get back to him. But a lot of people ask me about cost. Well, the replacement, the meal replacement, is about the same as going out and buying the groceries. So, you're not going to be out of pocket anything more than you would be normally. And I wanted to point out the average participant will drop 22 pounds in 60 days and lose 4 inches off their waist. It's backed up with a money-back guarantee, and if you'd like to know more, call Don Chandler right here in Twin Falls. Now, Don, many of you already know from been around town a long, long time. He dropped 50 pounds himself on this diet, and I think he's done a couple of more since then, just by working out now, too. But Don's telephone number, 208-731-3560. Again, call Don Chandler at 731-3560. How nice were these women? This is the thing. We're talking about these women in Washington. This is, the pollster. He's Frank Luntz. He's frequently on Fox News. You may be familiar with him. And he's explaining a situation that happened to him as he was passing through a hotel in Washington, and he got recognized by one of these peace-loving women.
Well, I got hit directly by it, and I've debated whether or not to talk about it because I don't want to encourage it. I do about 100 paid speeches a year, and I don't want this to ever happen to anyone, particularly me. But a woman walked up to me in the Marriott Marquis, and she shouted, "You fascist," and then 2 other words that would get me fired from your network. And she threw this red confetti glitter right in my eyes, and she picked up another handful, and she was no more than 6 inches away, and I was covered with this stuff. And since when do you have the right or just the ability to attack people in a private setting, in a private matter? I mean, you're going to end up hurting someone. I'm going to tell you something. These protests are out of control. The language is out of control. There are 8, 9, 10-year-olds watching this. They read these horrible words from these signs. And to have to face this personally, I mean, you can see I get choked up. I never thought this would be America.
I was watching another video over the weekend, and it was posted. And when I first saw it yesterday afternoon, it had about 14,000 page views. It was on YouTube. And it's about a woman who got thrown off an airplane because she ended up sitting next to a guy who was coming back from the inauguration, and he had a Trump shirt on. And she's just started harassing him and parading him. And then when the airline crew said to her, you got to keep it quiet, she said, "He's invading my space." She was dressed up, well, you could tell she was a liberal from 1,000 yards away because of the stringy hair. It looked like someone put a bowl on her head and cut her hair, no makeup and the like. She ended up getting escorted off the plane, and she wanted to argue with the police when they came and did it. But the people on the plane broke into applause. This morning, I looked at that same video about 5 o'clock, our time, and there's well over 100,000 page views on it. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley. It's 8:28. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm really not clear about what this march of all the women did over the weekend was for. They've got equality already. I think what they're doing is trying to say that God's law, which says that homosexuality is an abomination, they're trying to change it so that the United States says it's okay to be homosexual and God will forgive you. I also dislike the fact that they've got all those young children in there screaming those same things. That's the same thing that the ISIS people do over there. Have a good day.
Thank you much for the call. I've got this from Dwight Longnecker, who's a Roman Catholic priest and a writer at Patheos, 10 Reasons Why the Women's March Will Come to Nothing. He does not like Donald Trump, and he makes that clear, but he says the march was fake. Don't believe that what is going on is real. This is a big show put on by people behind the scenes with big money. 2, if it's fake, it's a lie. 3, it's not really about women. It's about left-wing women. It is about abortion. And he says Trump's administration might just defund Planned Parenthood. That's number 4. 5, it's about big money. Big abortion means big money. And he says 6, it is only about rage. There is nothing positive or worthy of real joy and passion. There is no positive mission. Number 7. Number 8, a lie dies. Number 9, there is no inner dynamic. It has no energy. Number 10, women are better than that. Many, many women have no time, he writes, for this kind of thing. They've got other obligations in life. Tell you what, the big national March for Right to Life, March for Life, takes place on the 27th. Media will ignore that, as it does every year, and it will bring out a far bigger crowd. Just saying, biggest civil rights event in the world, march in the world every year, and it gets ignored. 8:30, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. We're at 32 with snow. Randy Staples in about 15 minutes. Coming up after 9 o'clock this morning, Andrew Campanella. He is the president of National School Choice Week. He'll be joining us for a few minutes. There's an event, I believe it's just getting underway at the state capitol in Idaho. And as I mentioned earlier, 154 school choice events in Idaho alone this week. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're down to 30. It's not going to get any warmer today. Just passing that along. It's not going to get a heck of a lot warmer for a week to 10 days. The misery index continues to rise. It's 834, and I thank you for joining us today on Top Story. Just quickly, I wanted to mention Waddell and Reed this morning, which is an investment house located right here in Twin Falls. Waddell and Reed, by the way, has been in business since 1937. If you're doing the math, that's 80 years. One of the oldest firms to offer mutual funds, and in fact, it offers 2 mutual funds. Conservative nature is how they invest money. They know what they're doing. That's obvious. 80 years now in business. They'll take a planning approach if you come in, and they'll try to work with every last piece of the puzzle that you have if you're looking to invest for the future. They help build proper expectations, and they build plans around your needs and goals. Waddell and Reed will help you manage the money, and Waddell and Reed takes planning personally. Women march for everything under the progressive sun. The previous caller brought that up. What were they really marching for? Well, just to make noise. That's, in fact, this writer at Wall Street Journal, Corey O'Connor, it's on the op-ed pages of that paper today, said she posed a question to a woman who was in charge of some of the media for the march. The woman's name was Brianna Butler, called the global coordinator. And she said, this isn't a march on Trump. It's a march on Washington. And that pretty much says it all. They were marching against the Supreme Court and Congress and anybody else involved. And Ms. Butler went on to say, you have to hear our voices. We've been silenced. You need to take us into consideration. We are America. You heard that from that actress, Ugly Betty, over the weekend. She was among the speakers. Her name is America Ferrara, but they kept saying, we are America. Well, I'm America too. And as I said earlier in the program, nobody paid any attention to me for the last 8 years. When I was, in fact, all of these comments about crowd size. Now, media says, well, Trump is obviously lying and his press office is obviously lying that he had a bigger crowd. Who was out there with a clicker counting people as they were coming in? Because the National Park Service no longer, and has not in decades, ever since the 80 million, or was it 1 million man march back in 1995 with Louis Farrakhan attracted about 80,000 people. He threatened to sue the Parks Department for giving an assessment that nobody really cared, didn't really come out in large numbers. So they don't give numbers out any longer. And media is saying, yes, but you can just tell by the aerial photographs here that Obama had a much bigger crowd. Well, it was raining in Washington Friday. How many people were beneath the tree canopies? And even though there are no leaves out there, you really can't tell beneath the branches if there were people who were huddling under there to avoid the rain. And again, nobody was out there with a clicker, so you just don't know. Number two, Washington-Baltimore corridor has one of the largest African-American populations in the country. And if you extend that all the way down to Richmond and into Raleigh-Durham, and those aren't long drives either, and then up to Philadelphia, of course, Barack Obama, it was a historic event. He brought out a lot of people. Trump's actual ratings so far are reported to be third highest for an inauguration. Reagan had the highest his first time around. Third highest in history. Now, can I add this too as well? If they're going to be talking aerial photographs, speaking of lying about crowd size, media poo-pooed how big the crowds were at the 2009 Tea Party rally. I was there. I was there with our friend and frequent guest, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Heil, and a park policeman was telling us at 1 p.m. that afternoon, that September 12, 2009, that there were 1.5 million people there. But media said it wasn't even over 100,000. Well, I can look at aerial shots too then and compare them to these inaugural shots. And indeed, we had between 1.5 and 2 million people, and media lied about the turnout because they couldn't admit that there were that many people opposed to Mr. Obama. You're up next, and you're on the air at 8:38. You're on Top Story. Go ahead.
Well, let me tell you, people, that it was a Friday, and across this nation, the people that supported Trump are doing one thing. they're running their businesses or working at a business. And I was fortunate enough to take a little time and watch the inauguration, and I was able to watch the speech. And I talked to some of my other friends, and they said, we didn't have time. We were working. And this is the thing, whether or not there was however many people there on Saturday, across this nation, there's mothers and fathers who love this country and love their families who were working. And so, this march on Saturday, it means nothing really, because ultimately the Trump administration and the people that support him, which is growing day by day, is going to, I think, be very successful.
I thank you much for the input. And again, an unemployed coal miner who King Hussein Obama put out of business didn't have the money to travel to Washington, even though it was relatively close, because they're worried about getting food on the table. It's 8:39. We've got a short break. Randy Stable is from Idaho Weekly Briefing on the way. It's 31. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com.